Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're gonna discuss about clay pots mainly, but also clay materials. I want to point out some things that I was not aware of and I didn't realize until now, because clay pots and as well some clay materials are pretty popular in the orchid hobby and many people are thinking to switch to them, and in some climates and for some people they are really good, but they have some drawbacks and one of them is pretty important and I think you should just know about it. Now this is somewhat related to my previous video with the desiccated root tips. If you missed that video, I'll link it down below so you know what I'm talking about. And I have to say, on that video I was just so surprised at the amount of comments sharing the very same issues. Many of you told me that you do have issues in all types of setups, not only clay medium and so on. You have issues in clay pots with bark chips and organic medium, as well as semi-hydroponics in clay pots but with leca and so on. So I really want to thank you guys for taking the time to reply and share with me your experiences. Made me so much more relieved. And don't get me wrong, I'm not relieved or happy that you have issues. I have them too. But the first condition of actually solving an issue is figuring out what causes the issue, right? So now that I have an idea what the issue is, I can start thinking about ways to fix it. But as I was saying, today we shall focus on clay pots. Alrighty, so for this experiment, we're gonna use this Phalaenopsis orchid. I was just on my way to repot it, but before she gets repotted, she'll be subjected to a little test. So we have here some roots. As you can see, they're dry. What we're gonna do is pick two of them, let's say these ones, and we're gonna soak them in water. So as you can see, they're already changing in color. They're absorbing water. So what I wanna do now is saturate these roots with water. So let's just leave this orchid like this for a few minutes. If I can stabilize it, well, we're just gonna wet this root as well, but we're only gonna work with two of them. I'm gonna leave this orchid like this to soak up water and I'll come back with the second part of the experiment. Okay, what I will do next is attach one of the roots to a plastic pot and the other root to a clay pot. And practically what we shall observe is the drying rate, which root actually dries faster and why. So let's get the orchid out of the water. Yeah, we have quite a few roots to work with here. First, let's attach the first root to this plastic pot. And the way we'll do that is by using some raffia tape, which does not absorb water, and just try to make sure that the root touches this pot in as many places as possible. So I think this is pretty okay. Okay, so this is one root attached to the plastic pot, and the next root, let's say this one shall be placed on the clay pot. Let's see if we can make it touch the pot as much as possible. Slightly awkward angle to work on here, but I shall do my best. Okay, if you can please stop rolling. So what we have here is an orchid with two roots. One root is attached to the plastic pot, the other root is attached to the clay pot. Let's get a timer as well. Okay, so it is now 11:04 and we will come back in time and see the drying rate. What I want to see is if this root will dry faster than this root. Alrighty, I just came back from the supermarket actually. So let's take a look. I think I already see a little bit of a color difference, but not completely. This root is still wet, so let's give it a little bit more time. Okay guys, it's time to look at our experiment, and to be able to properly see what's going on, I need to take you in closer. So before we remove the roots from these actual pots, let's take a closer look. On the root attached to the plastic pot, as you can see, we still have moisture. The root is still green pretty much all the way to the tip. On the clay pot, on the other hand, we have quite the difference. Do you see the tip is almost completely dry, and also as it moves up, it becomes a little bit more soaked, but there is a clear difference between this root and the amount of water it still has and this root. Alrighty, now let's detach the roots and see what we have on the pots and on the roots themselves. Okay, so I've detached the roots, and as you can see, we have a clear difference between these roots. Let me show you something interesting. This is the root that set on the plastic pot. You can see it still leaves marks on the clay pot, while the root that already set on the clay pot leaves no marks. And this is because this root is almost completely dry, while the root that set on the plastic pot really quite still soaking wet. If we take a look at the pot, you can still see some staining. This is where the root was actually attached to, and the staining is moisture and water absorbed by the clay pot. Now, as you might notice, my drying is a little inconsistent. It is very dry at the tip, and as it goes towards the base, the root becomes more and more wet. There is a reason for that. The velamen of a root is absorbent and it distributes that water. You can do a little experiment. Take a tip or a section of the root, put it in water, and then you'll observe water climbing to the top of the root to some extent, if not even completely. So at this point, we can clearly see the difference between these two roots. Now, what can we deduct from here? Well, obviously, this root dried a lot faster. There are many factors that can actually determine how fast a root dries, starting with the orchid herself, the root itself, but also with external factors such as temperature, air circulation, humidity, and so on. So for this experiment, I tried to eliminate as many of the independent variables as possible. I used the very same orchid, and even though the roots might not be completely identical, they were positioned in the pot pretty much in the same way. They were inside the pot. One is not aerial and one comes from the pot. So I tried to make them as similar as possible. Also, you have noticed that the experiment on both roots was performed in the same environment with the same humidity and the same temperature and the same air movement and so on. So pretty much all the independent variables that I could control, I controlled and I made them be identical. And still we have this difference. What this actually means, as you might have guessed, is that there is something else which determines how fast the root dries. And this is the clay pot, because it is stealing, it is absorbing moisture from the root. Now, the velamen itself usually doesn't get all that damage because of this. Since the velamen itself is a protective layer, and you can clearly see it, when it's wet the layer becomes completely transparent, but when it's dry the layer is visible, it's a thin film. So in my experience and with the issues I'm experimenting, the velamen, the entirety of the root, doesn't really get affected. But what gets affected by clay medium in general, clay pot, clay materials, is the tip. And let me show you on a different orchid what I mean. The layer, the white layer you see is actually the velamen, the outer coating of the velamen. The root tip itself doesn't have this protection layer. It is green and it is far more sensitive than the length of the root. And if you watch the previous video that I made on this issue, you will see I only have issues with the root tips themselves desiccating, being damaged. So what conclusion can we draw from here? Well, obviously the clay pot can withdraw moisture from the roots. Now, of course, as long as the clay pot is saturated with water, is wet, it will not do this because it cannot absorb more water. But the drier it is, the more it will absorb water from the roots as well. It will also absorb water from the medium inside it, whatever medium this might be, whether inorganic or organic. As long as clay is dry, it will absorb any type of water or moisture that comes in contact with it, including orchid roots and specifically orchid root tips, which are not very protected as the upper part of the root is. Translating this into medium, since they are the very same materials, even though one might be more porous than the other, they will still act the same. And again, if you watch my previous video that I made, you will see what happens to a drop of water placed on each of these materials. So the point of this video is to draw attention to this aspect. The next experiment I might be able to do is to leave a root tip grow on clay and another root tip grow on plastic and observe from there what happens. But that's for a different time, and what I wanted to demonstrate right now is the absorption capabilities of clay when it's dry. So for this reason, you need to consider very well if this material is suited for you, if the orchid you plan on potting in a clay pot is suited for this or not, because as it just so happens, I never had issues on my Masdevallia orchid, which we might already know, it's a pretty sensitive orchid, especially when it comes to roots. Well, the fact that I maintain her pot always damp, always moist, never letting it go dry, pretty much gives an explanation to why I don't have issues on my Masdevallia. And since I'm talking about it, let's get to see her. So here is my Masdevallia orchid. I did an unpotting on this one. You can check the video below. I'll add it in the description. The roots are perfectly fine. I don't see any damage on the roots that are on the surface. Certainly not as much as the Victoria Reginae and the other orchids that I showed you. Not as much to make me think I have an issue. This is the only pretty much orchid in my collection which stays damp, even soaking wet sometimes, because it is that type of orchid which really hates drying out. So the purpose of this video is not to convince you that something is bad or something is good. Everything can be bad and good for certain people, for certain environments, for certain orchids even, lifestyle and so on. It is just one of the properties that might affect orchids in certain climates and for certain people that you should take into account and you should know about in caring for your orchids. If you do opt for clay pots and clay medium, and you know there is a real chance that your environment will completely dry very fast and you risk the pot drying out completely, you might want to check the root tips from time to time and see if everything goes okay. But I hope you will keep this in mind and you will adjust the care of your orchids if you opt for any clay material according to this property of the clay as well. And to give a little update for those of you who did watch that video, here is the orchid with the layer of pebbles on top. I don't have any damage in 4 days, as you can see. So yeah, I am very inclined now to think that I really messed up with the rocks on the Victoria Reginae. So far so good with the experiment. It will definitely take quite a while to observe some things and draw further conclusions, but so far we have a go with the experiment. I am pretty excited about it and we'll see what happens in the future. And if I seem to complain about every little single thing, well, yeah, I think I kind of do sometimes, but I just want things to be great. I don't want them to be okay or good enough. I want to see if I can do great things. I have a long way ahead of me, but a girl can dream, right? So thank you so much for watching this video. Hope you found something useful in it. You are free to do these experiments as well, because sometimes clay materials can vary from brand to brand. They're all porous, but some might be, let's say, more porous, more absorbent than others, and so on. So this is a simple and easy experiment you can do at home and you can do on your orchids and see what results you have. So thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe to my channel for daily orchids and plants videos. And also don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye! Now, who's this pretty lady with these pretty colors? Of course, it's my crown jewel, my Rincorita's Bangkok Sunset. I'll link down below to a presentation video on this orchid. She's one of my favorites and she smells as great as ever.